Only in America.
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 Welcome to Only in America. I'm Ali Nirani. We never know how the people we meet will impact our life. For one reporter, he followed 3 generations of a Filipino family and their journey to America, not knowing just how their story would change the course of his life and his career.
She waited 4 years to go home. I mean, we're talking about the kind of assimilation with her that happened in 3 or 4 years. That used to take 3 generations, right? She bought a house in the suburbs. She had a kid on the honor roll. She went back to the Philippines for the first time after 4 years, and I went with her. And her father was dying, and she said her final goodbye. And we got in the car to go to the airport. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a really tough ride back. And she turned to me and she said, "I'm going home. The U.S. is now my home."
And later, how the demographics of immigrants today are changing in ways that people may not realize. From the National Immigration Forum, I'm Ali Nirani. My guest this week is 2-time Pulitzer Prize finalist and veteran New York Times reporter Jason DeParle. He just released a book called A Good Provider is One Who Leaves: One Family and Migration in the 21st Century. The book tells the story of migration through a multi-generational saga of one Filipino family. Jason first met the Comodas family in the early 1980s when he was a young reporter. Since then, he's followed them from a Manila shantytown to Saudi Arabia to Dubai and finally to Galveston, Texas. Jason learned about the sacrifices the family made to escape poverty, how they pursued the American dream, and what makes the United States now feel like home. But his stories go even deeper. They present remarkable insights into the risks and benefits of migration and how they've changed over the years. It really is a remarkable book. Jason and I talked more about the family story and what he discovered on his journey following them over the years.
Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
I first want to start with, I loved this book. It was just we'll talk about this, but I just wanted to start with, I kind of tore through it in record speed. So let's start with a question of, okay, how do you find yourself here? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a reporter at the New York Times. I've been there about 30 years. I got into journalism because I was interested in poverty, and I've been fortunate enough to work at a publication that's let me cover issues of poverty, race, class, immigration for 3 decades with pretty free rein.
Why did you want to become a journalist?
I was interested in poverty more than I was interested in journalism. I'd spent a summer in India, the summer before my senior year of college, doing a service project. And when I got back to school, I wrote a story in a school publication about my experiences, mostly as an exercise in catharsis, and didn't know how to type. Wrote it out in longhand on legal pad, and that was my first experience of journalism. And decided to work in journalism for a couple of years while I figured out what I wanted to do and where I was going to go back to grad school, and fell in love with it.
So your book, A Good Provider is One Who Leaves: One Family and Migration in the 21st Century. In some ways, would you say that it tracks your growth as a journalist? It starts with you arriving in the Philippines as, I think you put it, as a cub reporter.
Well, actually, I had been working in New Orleans as a reporter at the Times-Picayune and covering poverty and the city's housing projects. And I got a little disillusioned with journalism because it seemed so abstract. I did a series on the public hospitals in Louisiana and had a great romance about the residents who could see a body come in and send it out healed, whereas all I could do was write about it. And interestingly, they had the kind of opposite reaction. They thought all they were doing is applying Band-Aids and I could foment systematic change. So I took a year off to kind of think about whether I wanted to be an observer or a more active participant. And I wanted to actually participate in a low-income community. I wound up in this shantytown in Manila and discovered that I really didn't want to be a doctor. I started taking notes and kind of reverted back into form.
So in the shantytown, you met Tita, right?
Wonderful woman, lifelong friend.
Tell me a little bit about Tita.
Well, I went to a nun and asked her if she could help me find a family to live with in the shantytown. The nun lived there, and she said, come back in a couple of days. And I thought she would screen a family and find somebody for me to live with. And instead, she grabbed me and walked me through this shantytown with 15,000 people in there and tried to sell me on the spot. First couple of people she approached weren't buying, and then Poor Tita was struck mute. I had a beard and was kind of scruffy guy, 26 years old. Sister Christine got exasperated and walked off and said, if you don't want him, pass him on to somebody else and don't cook him anything special. If he gets sick, too bad. And the two of us were left standing with each other, staring at each other. A crowd gathered and Tita tried to stall, but she figured that because Sister Christine had introduced us, she wanted Tita to let me move in, and she reluctantly agreed and gave me space on her floor.
And you wrote about kind of living and spending time with Tita, that it was an encounter with grace. And that I think ties back to, you tell me, like your interest in poverty issues, where you said you went from trying to understand, quote, what kept people from seizing opportunity in a land of plenty, the U.S., to how people seized opportunity where it scarcely existed.
Yeah, I went into the shantytown in Manila reading some academic studies, and they kind of measured poverty by caloric intake or by square footage or by income. Well, income. I mean, all these things were material economic measures of poverty are very important, of course. But what most stood out to me about Tita was her spirit and her kind of searching mind. She had a 6th grade education, but she asked these big questions all the time. She read an English language newspaper with a Tagalog English dictionary, and she would ask me, ano ang imperialismo? What is imperialism? I'm always hearing about imperialism, but I don't know what means imperialism. Mm-hmm. She asked me, why is it that if God loves his son, so many people are suffering? The issue of theodicy is the central issue of faith. And this woman with a 6th grade education and endless household chores was wrestling with it in a deep way. I just adored her mind.
Mm-hmm. So you tell a story of meeting her in the shanty town, but then kind of follow the family over the course of 30 years.
I met him 32 years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We became friends. I mean, it's odd to think of a real friendship existing across nationality lines, gender, class, language. I mean, everything about us was dissimilar, but I really loved Tita, and she took me in, and we became lifelong friends. And I stayed friends with her daughter Rosalie, who is really the protagonist of the story and the migrant who makes it to Texas.
Mm-hmm. So before we start talking about Rosalie's story, when I was thinking about this interview, I flipped to the beginning of the book for some reason. And you have these 2 quotes. Oh. And the first quote is from Frederick Douglass in 1869. Home has its charms and native land has its charms, but hunger, oppression, and destitution will dissolve these charms and send men in search of new countries and new homes. What struck me about this quote, and when I read this book, because I read the book while I was in Bangkok, learning actually about, for the first time really, migration from Asia to the Middle East. And really just this massive number of people who move every single day in search of work. So it's a long way of asking a question of, the story of Rosalie isn't necessarily just a story about Rosalie coming to the U.S. And it's about this relationship of this family to the Middle East. So I was wondering if you could kind of unpack that a little bit, because I don't think people understand that massive amount of migration.
So the book is about 3 generations of migrants. And the first generation, Rosalie's father, went to the Middle East, to Saudi Arabia initially. So the timing was ideal in one sense. The oil embargo in 1973 left the oil-producing countries in the Middle East awash in petrodollars. Saudi Arabia had more money than it could spend, but no workers. And the Philippines had gone under martial law in 1972. It had a huge population explosion, no jobs. It had more workers than it knew what to do with. And there was a communist revolution underway. So Marcos, the U.S.-backed dictator, had to get idle young men out of the country. And the Middle East needed strapping young men. So a marriage was born. And the Philippines actually developed a program. In most countries, migrants go abroad. They go abroad. It has nothing to do with the government. But in the Philippines, the government actually promotes it. They set up a bureaucracy to help people get jobs, to process the contracts, to market Filipinos. And they have salesmen who go around the world selling the Filipino worker, and the presidents celebrate them as national heroes for the remittances they send home.
That's what's true. It was a big, I didn't know this. And the programs they set up, but like you said, the celebration of the families that, took this huge step.
So when I first went back to the Philippines to write this story for the New York Times in 2007, my assignment was to write about the subtle effects of migration on Filipino culture. And I had this little bit of a fear that, you might need to be a cultural insider to know this, and it might be too subtle and might escape my grasp. And then I arrive in the Philippines and I ride past the central bank and it's got the year's remittance tally lit up in Christmas lights on a building 10 stories tall. So, it's not subtle. Migration is to the Philippines like cars were to Detroit at the heyday. It's just the civic religion. There's 5 stories a day in the paper about overseas Filipino workers.
And that's still the case.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's 10% of the country's GDP remittances.
So that's one generation goes to the Middle East.
Right. So the first generation goes to the Middle East, and it's mostly men. So Rosalie's father had a job cleaning pools at a government sports complex in Manila. He got the chance to go to Saudi doing the exact same work and made 10 times the money. Rosalie's uncle went and made 20 times the money he made in the Philippines. Another uncle made 3 times. I mean, it was all over the map, but it was huge increases that you could make from going to Saudi. But the initial work was male work. It was because they were building roads and hospitals and construction, and they needed muscle. By the time Rosalie went, the second generation, it was less this kind of daring gambit as more like a rite of passage. Everybody in the family had gone. And the migration was feminizing because the work was changing, as it was worldwide. Rich countries were aging. They needed caregivers. They needed nannies. They needed retail clerks once the malls were built. They needed nurses once the hospitals were built. By the 90s, 3/4 of the Filipinos newly leaving every year were women, which had profound effects for their relationships with their kids, but also their relationships with their husbands, because the women became often the breadwinners, and profound implications for their well-being in some cases.
How's that?
Well, Rosalie is a nurse, so she's a pretty privileged person in the hierarchy, even though she came from a very low-income background. But the people who go as domestic workers work out of public sight in their homes, and the Manila press is just full of stories of rape, starvation, abuse, beatings, scaldings with irons. I mean, it's terrible what people go through, particularly domestic workers. The Filipinos are quite aware of the rolling the dice nature of going abroad. They don't say, I'm going to make my fortune. They say, I'm going to try my luck. That's the idiomatic phrase. When they say, I'm going abroad, I'm going to try my luck.
Kind of speaking of phrases, the title of the book and another quote that you have right at the beginning is, "A good provider is one who leaves." What was the context of that particular quote?
So that's from Tita's sister, Peachy. So Tita's one of 11 siblings. Tita, the woman who took me in her shanty, she's one of 11 siblings. In her generation, 9 of the 11 went abroad or had a sibling who did. One of her siblings is Peachy, her husband. She wanted her husband, Wenny, to go abroad. And she was explaining to me that they lived in a thatched hut and were seeing relatives come home and being able to build cement blocks homes. And she turned to her husband and said he needed to go. A good provider is one who leaves. Mm-hmm. My initial lens on the story was poor Rosalie or poor Wenny. They had to go abroad. From their perspective, it was more like, lucky me, I get to go abroad. The opportunity to migrate is not an opportunity open to everybody. And generally, it's not open to the poorest of the poor. You have to have some connections to get the job. You have to have money for a passport. You have to pass a medical exam. Often you get fleeced by middlemen recruiters. People go deeply into debt. They sell farms. They sell livestock. So it's considered an opportunity from their standpoint, and a lucky one.
So in this way, this is a pretty unique story because there were multiple steps of migration. And for the most part, everything, I'm not saying it was easy, right? But as I recall, there weren't moments where they were fleeced by middlemen. I remember, I think Rosalie's husband had a major accident on a cruise line.
Her cousin's husband lost a limb on a ship. Yeah, so that was tragic. I'd say the biggest negative impact it had on the family was in marriages. There was a lot of adultery, lots of children born out of wedlock. Rosalie had an uncle who went to Saudi, left behind a daughter named Cheryl, and came back with another named Sherilyn. Mm-hmm. Didn't tell his wife, gave the child to Tita to raise, keeping it a secret from her sister-in-law, put Tita in a real bind. I mean, the family conflicts were a constant source of worry and anxiety. And in the case of Manu, the cruise ship worker, it did lead to physical injury. Mm-hmm. Rosalie, being a nurse and being the most successful in the family, was largely spared that.
But it's also kind of the family connections. They don't necessarily become easier because of technology. You had written about some families having FaceTime open the entire day just to hear the background noise of what was happening in Manila. We'll assume that, if you can see somebody on video, it makes it easier.
For some people it did. I think it depends on the age of their kids in part. So for Rosalie, when she was apart, her kids were younger and it was hard for her to connect with them. And I think sometimes seeing them, the kids were preschool and they couldn't really talk. And seeing them, I think, upset Rosalie. She had a cousin who was a nanny. She was in Abu Dhabi raising somebody else's kids while kids were home with her parents. And as they got to be teenagers, Facebook actually was a really helpful tool to test because she could see their friends. She could kind of get a context for what they were doing, and they could chat. And chatting didn't require them to be on the same schedule. They were 4 time zones apart. It wasn't quite as intense and intimate as being on the phone, but sometimes it could turn that way. Tess shared, and her daughter Marielle shared hundreds of pages of their chats with me. And sometimes they would just, in the middle of the night, text each other on chat. And Marielle would just say, "Mommy," M-A-M-I, exclamation point. And a few hours later, Tess would respond, "Anak," exclamation point. It means child in Tagalog. And there was a lot said in 2 words.
Yeah.
Whatever it literally said, it meant "I love you."
So then the final generation, if you will, is Rosalie moving to the U.S., which is the next generation, I should say. As you kind of look back across the different generations, what is the difference that you see between that family moving to the Middle East, that family coming to the U.S.?
Permanence. She came to the U.S. in part because if you're Filipino, you're inclined to think of the U.S. as the place to go. I mean, the U.S. has great prestige value in the Philippines. Philippines was once a U.S. colony. But more than that, it was the permanence. You could settle there. So when she went to Abu Dhabi, you can never settle in Abu Dhabi. You can never become Emirati. You're always a guest worker. And when you turn 60, you go. When she came to the United States, she could bring her kids, and her kids could become American. And that meant more to her than I understood initially. When she got here, at least for the first couple of years, she did not really benefit economically because it was more expensive here. And she probably broke about even from what she was making in Abu Dhabi, but she could settle into the place, and she knew that her children would have a future here.
And did you notice that there was a kind of an inflection point where she realized and the family realized that they were here to stay?
Interestingly, Rosalie was the ringleader. She was the one who wanted to come to the stage. She was the one who got the job, and she had the hardest time adjusting. So I think everybody else in the family got that idea before she did. I've really wondered about that. I think maybe she had the U.S. on such a high pedestal that the realities of it disappointed her, whereas the others, having fewer expectations, were quicker to embrace it. But in the general scheme of things, Rosalie became American awfully fast. She waited 4 years to go home. I mean, we're talking about the kind of assimilation with her that happened in 3 or 4 years. These take 3 generations, right? She bought a house in the suburbs. She had a kid on the honor roll. She went back to the Philippines for the first time after 4 years, and I went with her. And her father was dying, and she said her final goodbye. And we got in the car to go to the airport. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a really tough ride back. And she turned to me and she said, "I'm going home. The U.S. is now my home." This was a woman with terrible homesickness when she first got here. You talked about the Skype. She had the roosters on all day long in her apartment. There 7,600 islands in the Philippines. She was 7,601st. She just Tagalog soaps on the TV, Tagalog food in the refrigerator, roosters crowing. And so 4 years later, to be able to say wholeheartedly, the U.S. is my home, that's quite an adaptation.
Exactly. And that's it was really remarkable to read. But then the other part of this was her husband's integration into the U.S. and kind of what did his job and his work mean to him?
So her husband's an engineer, but went to work at the city wastewater plant. In conventional terms, it was probably a step down in status, as it was for lots of the men who followed. Rosalie was part of a group of 20 nurses, and 19 of them were women. So you had all these men following their wives to America and experiencing a degree of kind of downward status. All the men dealt with it in kind of different ways. Some had affairs, some drank. Chris got involved in raising fighting cocks. It's illegal to fight them in the U.S. It's not illegal to raise them. And he raised them and sent them back to the Philippines. That was his escape. But he liked the U.S. before Rosalie did. Again, I think he had fewer expectations and saw there was an opportunity there for his kids.
So what do you hope that the reader takes away from this?
I can answer that with a paragraph if you don't mind me answering.
Better than me reading it. Go for it.
There's a lot of discussion given to the impact on fiscal budgets, the impact of immigration on labor markets, cost-benefit analysis. And I wouldn't say that's not important, but I'd say that cost-benefit analysis alone doesn't do her story justice. Rosalie's escape from the slums is a minor miracle. Migration was her vehicle of salvation. It delivered her from the living condition of the 19th century. It respected her talent, rewarded her sweat, and enlarged her capacity for giving. It made her life deeper, fuller, and more filled with hope. It's great that migration helped her help others. It's also great that it helped her help herself. That her quest ended in Texas is something for Americans to cheer. It's good for your country to be the place people go to make dreams come true. I think that's what I want people to take away from it, that they should be proud that we're a country that the world's strivers strive to reach.
Do you think that's at risk?
Yes, very much so. I think it's at risk economically because we're in a period of such great inequality and hampered social mobility. So the last great wave of migrants, the Ellis Island generation, at least their descendants inherited the post-war economy, that escalator that brought everybody up. I'm sure this generation is going to inherit the same thing. And we're also in a moment of great political peril where it's become, if you tell immigrants loudly and longly enough that they're not wanted, they may come to believe you.
My last question for you is just to finish this sentence. The name of the podcast is Only in America. So Only in America, ...
Only in America could Rosalie have bought that house and settled the suburbs and become an American. She couldn't become an Emirati. She can only become an American.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Support for the National Immigration Forum comes from the James Irvine Foundation, expanding opportunity for the people of California, and from the Carnegie Corporation of New York, established in 1911 by Andrew Carnegie to promote the advancement and diffusion of knowledge and understanding.
The Camollas family from Jason's book is a good representation of what newly arriving immigrants to the U.S. are like. In terms of demographics, immigrants from Asian countries are projected to become the largest immigrant group in the U.S. by 2055, making up 38% of all immigrants. But the profile of newly arriving immigrants are changing in other ways too. First, in country of origin. While Mexico remains the top country of origin, accounting for 25% of all U.S. immigrants, according to Pew Research, by region of birth, South and East Asian immigrants comprise 27% of all immigrants. And right now, among newly arriving immigrants, India is the top country of origin. The second change is in gender. Like in Rosalie's story that Jason writes about, the Migration Policy Institute describes a global feminization of immigration. From 1960 to 2015, the number of female migrants around the world has doubled. In 2015, women comprised 48% of all international migrants, according to the Cornell Policy Review. Destination countries have a growing demand for jobs that migrant women often fill, including the healthcare, domestic work, and manufacturing sectors. Furthermore, women have become independent migrants and often primary economic providers. All to say, immigrants are coming from a variety of places, bringing important skills across the spectrum that our workforce and our economy need. As they have since our nation's founding, immigrants continue to contribute in important ways, and our economy and our culture continue to benefit from them. Jason DeParle is a two-time Pulitzer Prize finalist and veteran New York Times reporter. He's the author of A Good Provider is One Who Leaves, One Family and Migration in the 21st Century. You can find more information about Jason on our website, immigrationforum.org. And if you like what you hear, make sure to subscribe to Only in America on Apple Podcasts. Only in America is produced and edited by Emily Chow, Joanna Taylor, and Megan Wetmore. Kathleen Farrell is the executive producer, and I'm Ali Narani. Thank you for listening to Only in America, and I will talk to you next week.